our panelists. We have Rex Black, and I think a lot of people know Rex as a fairly prolific author, and as well as a trainer for ISTQB courses and certifications. He's been in business for a heck of a long time, but we won't say that so we don't have to reveal his age. Um, we've got Jon Hagar, who's semi-retired, and that speaks for itself. And he is also an author as well as one of the editors for the standard. So Jon will bring a very knowledgeable view today. We've got Jean Ann Harrison, who has been working with in testing for quite a while as well in a regulatory environment, and she also is specializes in mobile testing. And lastly, we have Griffin Jones, who's one of the context-driven proponents, who also had a really good viewpoint in our debate here. So let's begin. Now, first of all, I just want to go over some of the origins of the webinar. We posted a blog post several months ago, and it seemed like we got a lot of negative feedback on the blog post as far as the usefulness. I think that the title was useful or not, and most people said, oh, it's kind of stupid, not useful, and so forth. And there are some comments on the blind application of the standard and so forth. So we decided to have this webinar to have not only the people that didn't like the standard, but also have people that thought that the standard could be useful, and have both sides kind of express their views. Just a little bit of background. Here's some information on ISO 29119. That's basically a 5-part standard. Some parts have been published. Some parts are still anticipating publication and under review. So I won't read this. Here are some links if any of the attendees want to go and check out more. Many people oppose 29119. There's even a petition to stop 29119. Feel free to go there and take a look at some of the information there as well. And now we'll just get on with the debate. And the reason that I wanted to have it in debate style was because to give everyone a chance to express their views. A lot of times if you look online, there's a lot of information on negative views of ISO 29119, but there's not a lot in terms of people that support it. So I wanted to get a panel that had a diverse background and views of the standard so that everybody could express what they thought of it. So here we have our proposal that 29119 is useful and has a positive influence on the software testing industry and profession. And there's also always some gray in there, and you can see, so we have orange on the right and blue on the left, and there's always this kind of middle ground there that's kind of a mixture of colors. So I would assume that a lot of folks would move towards that middle, just like in politics, I guess. But on the right-hand side, we have disagree, which is will be represented by Jean Ann Harrison and Griffin Jones, and on the left-hand side, we have the agree viewpoint, which will have Rex and Jon. So what we're going to do is just start off with one side at a time and run it in a debate style. But we're not going to be really strict, but the whole point was to monitor the timing so that everybody gets to have their say. So what we'll do is first, here's the format. I won't read the format out, but you guys, I think we've shared this with the panelists already, so you guys can take a look at this. And we're going to start off with an agree viewpoint, which will be Rex and Jon. Cross-examinations are really just asking questions on the viewpoint that was just given, questioning the validity of the viewpoint, and then you go on and make your own say speech on what your viewpoint is. So why don't we go ahead and start with the agree viewpoint, and we'll let Rex and or Jon present their views for the next 6 minutes. Go ahead, you guys. Tell us what you have to say.
Rex, you want to talk first? Or you want me? I'm happy to talk first.
Why don't you go ahead, John, since
Okay.
Rex seems to be
Okay, sure. And Rex, feel free to jump in at any point. I do have to put a caveat in there. While I am the ISO and IEEE project editor for all the parts, I have the caveat that says the views that I'm going to express here are my own, and they don't represent necessarily ISO and IEEE, as most lawyers would want me to backpedal on something like that. With that, I think one of the things that Phil said needs to be talked about is a lot of the people that are starting to use it and support the standards, which is going slow. That's normal for a standard like this in the ISO community. A lot of the potential users are relatively quiet. They don't feel the need to go out and debate and justify. There have been a few things published in response to some of the criticism, but there were about 21 countries in the ISO organization directly involved in producing the standard. Inside of that group, there were numerous large companies and some government organizations and representing government organizations involved. And the ISO and the IEEE approach to these things is through consensus, and I realize that needs to be addressed here momentarily. But inside of IEEE and ISO, consensus was reached on the standard. So it wasn't just one or two people like myself creating this thing. There were, as I said, 21 countries, multiple people for each country, and then IEEE also had a vote. There was a good majority of people in IEEE that approved the thing. So when the ISO and IEEE people talk about consensus, they're talking about that community, albeit not representing all testers. And that's one of the things some of the criticism has said is, gee, this thing doesn't represent all testers. I don't believe ISO or IEEE would ever have claimed that we represented all people in the test community when we talk about consensus. But certainly inside of those organizations, consensus was reached. And the companies and organizations looking to use it are using it as what I've heard some people refer to as a trading language. And so the familiar sets of concepts and ideals in the testing world would have a common starting point for things like contracts and discussions. So that was a primary motivator. I've also heard it said that there aren't software testing and system testing standards. There are in the IEEE and ISO, and this is part of that collection of standards, again, for use by member organizations. So it's the kind of thing that even those of us that worked on it recognized it's not perfect. We also, most of us, advocate that some level of tailoring of the standard, if you are using it, is necessary. So we recognize that it's not a one-size-fits-all. Context matters, and you have to have thinking testers involved in there. Rex, you got anything to add on that? Because I think I'm probably running out of time.
Yeah. What I would say is, as Phil put it, there's shades of gray here. I'm not so much a pro 29119 guy. I'm more of an anti-con position. So here's what I mean by that. I would expect that 29119 is going to have about the same amount of impact as IEEE 829 has had, which is primarily a source of useful and interesting ideas, with some people choosing to comply with it more closely than others because it serves their purposes to do so. And as such, I think the level of drama and concern about this is really overdone. I've worked with thousands of testers around the world and just haven't seen standards have a negative impact. I've had them seen a mild. I've had them have seen them have a mild positive impact. I would say that the thing that bothers me the most about this whole debate is how some of the participants in the discussion, and nobody on the line here, but some of the people on the internet just immediately went into disparaging the character and the integrity of people involved in the standard and just people peripheral to the standard. And I think it's really unfortunate that we can't have open debates like this one here without having to worry about some troublemakers jumping in and immediately getting these ad hominem attacks and claiming that people have bad motives. So I'm sure that everybody on that committee was there trying to do something that was valuable. And having done a lot of volunteer work with ISTQB myself, I know that the rewards, whatever those rewards are, they certainly are not financial.
That's for sure. Okay, let's let you guys, Griffin and Jean Ann, cross-examine what they had to say. I think there was some stuff on consensus as well as some other topics there that you guys can cross-examine.
Yeah, so let me start. So what I heard you say is that the drivers who are actually doing this is it's a consensus standard, so a large group of people met over a long period of time and came to agreement. That's being used as a trading language, so a way to have simpler, common communication between everyone. That it's theoretically scalable. Rex, you made a point about it being comparable to 829. I hope that, personally, that it has the same impact as 829 had at the end of its particular life. And you were also disparaging the wrong word. You were noting your concerns about the way the tone of the debate is occurring online. So I think that kind of sums up. Jean Ann, do you want to pick up from here?
Yeah, one thing that John mentioned was about the, any testers, any situation, and one of the problems that I have with it is applying any, the word any. There's a lot of different situations out there. Yes, we all know it's a grand acceptance of any. But the problem is that the very first line in the standard actually states the standard is to define an internationally agreed set of standards for software testing that can be used by any organization when performing any form of software testing. And I don't know about anybody else, but my experience is that just within my small set of experience that any is way too large to apply this standard, and it's very difficult to say that it's going to work. And I think that's one of the reasons why people get so upset. And they do. I agree with Rex. They get very emotional, and it's kind of, well, in my opinion, very silly to get emotional about a situation. We all are working. We all are trying our best, and to be so emotional, pro or against, it takes away from the value of what we're trying to do. We're all trying to produce high quality products, and we're all trying to produce it in the best way we can. So it seems rather silly to be so emotional about it, and that's one of the problems I have across the board. I don't care if you're for or against. I will walk away. Yeah.
Jean Ann, you're really questioning the consensus and any for that John was talking about. And
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's a good point. That the way that it's written, where it says any.
And I think that's what a lot of people are reacting to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, what about your own? Oh, here's a poll here, Sabrina. Why don't you go ahead and do the poll, Sabrina, if you can? what is your primary responsibility? So we're going to do a poll to see who's online now. And Sabrina, are you going to do the poll?
Yep, doing it.
Okay.
So let me pick up on a point that Jean Ann made. So,
Yeah.
quite frankly, around consensus and trading language, which is the theoretical tailorability, personally, and I'm speaking for myself, I really don't find them sufficiently motivating to impose a standard across the entire industry.
Mm-hmm.
That there isn't sufficient value in this to justify the cost that's going to be incurred and the risks.
So,
Respond to that, though? Because I think the word impose there presupposes that this is going to be imposed by some sort of legal fiat on, and you said entire industry, Griffin. Again, just with reference to the other standards like ISO 9126 and IEEE 829, there's just no historical evidence that 29119 is going to have the kind of dramatic industry-wide impact that you're referring to. I just don't see any historical precedent for that.
yeah, this is John again. I agree with Rex. I don't think that word imposed. I don't think there's, I'll say, even bodies anywhere in the world that can mandate everybody use the thing. It's more a self-selecting process that we've seen in other kinds of standards where somebody wants that as a starting point. To Jean Ann's concern about the word any, it's one of those items that I've actually taken for future revisions to maybe seek a better word. The groups struggled with that a little bit, and at least my viewpoint of the word any is it does not mean all. So it's not intended to say that all software projects have to use this, or that all maybe even would benefit from using it. But projects, organizations, companies, countries that want to select it as a starting point can. So we maybe need to find a better word than that any, because I think people are reading more into that word and that phrase than should be read in. I've also heard people say that this is the 29119 is supposedly representing the idea of a best practice. We specifically avoided that phrase because we don't see it. Those of us that worked on it saw it much more as kind of I'll call it rear-facing as opposed to state-of-the-art best set of ideas that represents a low bar, not a high bar.
But it's the terminology that's used.
I think.
John, why
I'm
don't we
sorry to
let
interrupt.
Jean Ann and Griffin talk about why they primarily disagree besides the any and all wording? Go ahead, Jean Ann.
The wording in terms of standard versus guideline, and also the implication that this standard is going to work for every industry, every domain, and clearly it will not. And I understand your point, both of your points, about that this can be a good start, and I agree with you. It could be a good start, but the term standard tells me it's a mandate. You must follow. In the regulated world, this will not work as well because it does limit. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's only mandated, and compliance is only necessary if somebody selects it and imposes it. So you're right. A regulatory body could pick it up and say, thou shall, and there are shalls in there because that is the ISO way, and then you get into issues of compliance and assessments and things like that. but that's something that an individual set of customers, stakeholders, and users would have to decide. It's not imposed upon the industry in general.
But that's the problem, is the misunderstanding of it's a standard, therefore it must be applied. And it doesn't matter what the domain is. It doesn't matter what the industry is. And it's the terminology that I think is what's creating the reaction of dislike, to say the least.
Sure, I understand.
One of the things that I was thinking about in terms of an idea, as you were talking, John, was, can you create a situation or create categories of industries as, and instead of standard, maybe guideline, strongly recommended guideline, but it gives you that bend in allowing the creativity, allowing the ability to apply maybe to a situation. Part of it can work, but part of it cannot. And yes, it's a lot of writing, yes, it's a lot of coverage, but maybe create some categories of industries that here's some suggestions to create some, I don't want to say standards, but some ideas, some pathways to try and take up. And another thought, why is there only, maybe I'm wrong, there isn't any standard, ISO standard for writing development. Is there a writing?
Yes.
There is.
Yep,
Okay.
there is. Both for systems and software, 12.207 and 15.288, and then there's a whole bunch. So for both systems engineering, software engineering, QA, quality, there's a whole bunch of these standards in the ISO libraries.
Thank you.
Okay.
So-
I think, go ahead. You guys can keep talking now.
Yeah, so let me take an opportunity and just lay out my side. So I differ slightly from Jean Ann in this way. So these are my thoughts and not anyone else's. I'm not going to argue all the little details of what I disagree with. In my opinion, the ISST, the International Society of Software Testing's webpage on STOP 29119, does a really good job in terms of aggregating together the entire conversation, both pro and con. So if you want to see details, quite frankly, people in the audience, please go to that site. I think it is helpful to get a clear picture of both sides.
Well, can I comment on that, though? Those guys are the ones who are organizing the anti-standard petition, so they're hardly an unbiased source, Griffin.
I agree, but they also have really good references to the pro side. Do you agree with that?
There are some references to some of the things that have been put out on the pro side. That is true.
Okay. And they touch many of the blogs that are having conversations about individual people's points of view of why they personally disagree or agree with 29119. So I think it's a place to start. I'm not claiming it to be an authority. I'm just suggesting that it's a good place to start. Next thing. I really applaud the ISO in Geneva. They recently accepted the petition, and they seem to indicate that they're going to be looking at the working group and how the working group 26 did their particular work. And so I'm looking forward to a thoughtful and timely response from ISO about the points that the 29119 petition raised and what the ISST also put inside their cover letter. So I think that would actually be helpful. So in general, a general statement. So any proposed like technical professional standards, in my opinion, should be so clear that it's obviously correct, and frankly, so obvious that it's clearly correct. For me, this particular standard and documentation doesn't meet that test. My concerns break down into essentially 4 areas. First of all, there's just a lack of supporting evidence that this is actually theoretically sound or at a practical level sound. So that's one point. There are also, as I try to implement this in my context, which is usually medical devices, pharma, or other regulated industries, I'm not seeing it as being a practical way to either implement things at a high strategic level or at the details of the project. So that's a problem. It's also not functional at a theoretical level. So Jim Bullock has been really helpful with me in terms of clarifying some of those theoretical flaws that I've seen. And then quite frankly, at a more fundamental level, it drives behaviors that I don't like to see happening. So there's a degree of engineering abdication that I see happening when people latch onto standards that occurs. So those are my basic high-level issues with the standard.
Okay, thanks, Griffin. I think there's a question that came in from the audience, which also kind of rolls into what I think would be the cross-examination by Rex and Jon. And the question was, the question comes in from somebody from Switzerland that asks, basically that ISTQB is required to be on resumes just to get a job now, and they fear that the ISO 29119 will have some kind of a influence like that. So maybe Rex, you want to handle that since you're involved with ISTQB.
So first off, it's important, I think, to recognize that the ISTQB is about certifying the skills of individuals, and the ISO 29119 standard is about process used by organizations. So those are two different things. So now, in terms of ISTQB being required, I mean, I would say that if employers are finding that it is advantageous to hire people that have a certain level of knowledge and have demonstrated that via objective and psychometrically tested examinations, then I don't see that that's a problem. Now, certainly people can disagree with some of the things that are in ISTQB syllabi, and I'm sure I could find some things that I point to and say, yeah, I don't think that's quite right. But on the whole, is the ISTQB certification having a positive influence on the industry and raising the bar for what testers' skills are? I think that's clear, and the fact that employers are embracing it like this is evidence of that.
So, and I'd like to pick up a little bit. Rex is absolutely right. ISO 29119 is an industry, both process, documentation, and soon technique standard. It was not intended to be the kind of thing that somebody would, I'll say, have to show on their resume, if you will. It's more on the organizational side. I'd also like to talk to some of Griffin's points because I think they were good, and certainly those of us that will continue working on the standard are very interested in things like the word any and some of these other very, to me, legitimate points that in future revisions we will try and address as we get more, I'll call it, input from industry. And on the evidence issue that Griffin first brought up, we have a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. To get the evidence that the standard would work and the items in the standard would work, you kind of have to have the standard so that you can then engage, I'll call it, some researchers and people maybe more on the academic side to come along and go, this is good, this is okay, and this just doesn't work. A few of us associated with the ISO organization have been in contact with some of that research academic community to kind of apply the scientific method, if you will, to the standard to find out where the evidence points that the thing is good and where the thing maybe needs to do some changes. So that's a chicken and egg problem that's going to take some time to solve. Griffin's point about particular industry usages, and I think Jean-Ann brought it up a little bit, of specific areas and projects. That one also, in my mind, will take some time for various organizations, maybe regulatory bodies, to come along and go, this works, this doesn't work, we need to change that. So again, you got a kind of chicken and egg problem where till we get some people actually using the thing, I think it's largely speculatory as to which things will work, and in general, will the thing work or not work. There are probably theoretical flaws. Again, we hope that people, which is why one reason I regard the whole stop movement and some of the things, feedback to ISO from opposing viewpoints, I actually look at this as all good and positive, the kind of thing that as project editor, I want this feedback from the larger community. And ISO goes through a regimented process in terms of their standards. They have to come up for a review in the 3 to 5 year period, which means a new revision somewhere in that time period. And finally, encouraging the right behavior. That's a tricky one. Any technology, any tool, any concept, in my experience, can be misused as well as it can be used. So what we don't know is, on the whole, will more use be positive than negative? That one, I think that's going to take a number of years before we can decide every way, and people are going to have their own opinions in that time frame. But for me, as the editor, I seek input, and I encourage everybody to provide input back to those of us that are directly working on it, either by participation or I think my email's pretty much out in public. People can always send me inputs. I'm happy to get inputs.
Yeah, John, you were talking about positive and negative cases, and so there's a question actually that came in, and it says, are there case studies of the standard being used, and how did the standard effect testing work? So we'll let you finish that up before we go back to get back to Jean Ann and Griffin.
Let me understand. The question is, has it been used, and was it positive or negative?
Yeah, that's basically it. Are there case studies of the standard being used, and how did the standard effect testing work? Okay,
there are no published case standards yet that I'm aware of. Again, it's only been out for a year and a half or so. It takes time to get those kinds of things up and published, so I'm not aware of any. I can tell you on a personal note, I have seen it in use in a few places, and the places that I was aware of, I think it was viewed as a positive. That's the kind of thing that I need to, here in the next few months, get something published on. But I can't say more than that. I can't say the company and things like that. It's not been released publicly.
Okay. All right, one more poll. Sabrina, can you run the next poll?
Sure.
Sabrina?
It's launched.
Okay. We'll give 30 seconds for the poll here.
Interesting.
Are any existing standards currently adhered to in your organization?
41%, yes.
Yeah.
That's higher than I thought, by the way.
Yeah.
Which part is higher?
The 41% saying yes.
Oh, wow.
Well, I wonder what is meant by adhere to, though. Here, I mean, I would say that if you interpret adhere to as in, I have borrowed ideas out of one or more international standards, is what adhere to means for them. Then yeah, I would agree that that's the number I would expect. Strictly adhering to, I would expect more like 1 or 2%.
Right. I think the word adhered to is pretty broad.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, this somewhat goes to, I'd agree with Rex, there's a lot of ideas that might be gotten from various standards, even books and things like that, and that's probably where you got the 41%. The idea of a lot of us on the ISO 29119 is that most organizations, the any word, would review this and go, oh, that's an interesting idea, maybe we'll try that, but not try for any kind of compliance or even tailoring compliance. And a few would maybe under regulatory issues, few companies, few countries might go for compliance. By the way, I didn't mention this, but in the ISO methodology of creating standards, they have to write them in some cases to be used as a compliance document, hence the shalls. But it's not, as we said earlier, it's not a mandatory thing that's going to be enforced on every single tester in the world. That's kind of not the intent.
But the problem that I have with is it's not being forced on every tester. But the problem is that management sees this word standard. And I know we've already talked about the terminology, but it's the management is the one that's doing the forcing, not the tester feeling that from some cloud body. And so when you have managers telling your testers you must follow this standard, and and hire people. Do you have ISO standard 29119 experience? And that they only hire people with that experience. So there is that feeling of being locked into following something that may or may not work based on the thinking tester and the thinking tester's experience. So again, there's that emotional, I know I feel emotional about it, being told these things, and also not being hired because I don't have the experience. And that's not right. And that's where people are saying, stop it, redo it. And of course, I understand, John, your very good point about it takes years to wheedle out the issues, the problems. And of course, not every organization can follow and interpret the wording the way it was intended. So there's an awful lot of problems.
Yeah, and the danger for misuse and abuse is, as I tried to say earlier, that's there in any technology, any concept, any tool. Again, the thinking testers out there and have to educate their managers. I've heard it observed that it's better to have nothing than to have this because of that danger. I've come out of the places, regulatory environments, and companies that see it just the other way around. We'd rather, in the places I came out of, have that so that we can then start the process of, I'll call it, improvement to address those kind of issues versus just staying, I'll call it, ignorant in the dark and having nothing. You gotta start some of this. We're a maturing industry. If you look at other industries, other engineering industries and other professions, they go through the same kind of, I'll call it, infancy problem on getting these things out. Yeah, the first versions need a lot of work, but if you just stay in the dark, then we're always going to be kind of second-class citizens. And I've tried for a long time to make us a profession.
But what I do, you mentioned some really key words, and one of them was immaturity of industry. And the biggest thing that your experience, because you and I have worked together a few times, and I know your experiences with governmental regulation environments. My experience is in the medical device industry, like Griffin, and it's a mobile software, and it is so immature in terms of process, in terms of testing. And because of that, there has to be a lot of leeway. And the learning process of management is one where, at least my experience is, they've thrown up their hands and said, you do what you want, because we don't know what to do at this point. And so those of us have gone ahead and created some standards to try and, just within our own company, to try and maintain some sort of high quality and consistency. But the problem is the mobile testing, and I do want to say the medical device testing is it's very, very difficult. You know, I often say we don't know what we don't know, and that's the case. And so we have a long way to go before we can even follow what your experience is in what you just described, where you have corrective actions. And the corrective actions and try to prevent situations. Medical device, as far as I'm concerned, does not exist yet. They just don't know.
All right, there's a question that came in from the from the audience, and the question is, the problem is that, you know, we have some standards like HIPAA and so forth that deal with outputs of process, but not necessarily the process itself. Yeah. And they govern things that should be done with dealing in certain areas. How do you distinguish standards about outputs which are easy to measure and standards which impact the process which are not easily measured, which is kind of a little bit about what you're talking about, Jeanine, in terms of medical devices not really being a good way to apply standards. So maybe Rex, can you answer that one, or can you?
At first, yeah. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I would like to take a stab at this because I want to start off by questioning the premise of the question, which is to say that you can't measure the testing process. Au contraire, I do a lot of consulting work that involves assessments, and I measure the testing process, its effectiveness and efficiency, and the extent to which it satisfies its stakeholders all the time. So this is something that absolutely can be done, I think that that's to the point that was raised earlier about case studies and measuring the effectiveness and so forth. That's the way of approaching this, is looking at organizations that adopt this 29119 standard. Is it actually having a positive impact on things like defect detection effectiveness and cost per defect found and cycle time on running tests and so forth?
Okay. Griffin?
So, I'd also like to add to that a little bit. I've heard it observed that the test industry is mature, and some areas are more immature in testing than others, and I don't disagree with those statements. They use that then as an argument to say, well, it's too early for a standard, and the standard represents narrow viewpoints of a few. Those may be legitimate concerns, but again, one problem I've had for years is there wasn't a standard that one could use as a point of departure and criticism, that trading language kind of thing, and that my experience is it's always hard to create the first initial thing, whatever it is, a piece of software, a piece of test plan. It's very difficult to create that. It's impossible to get it right the first time. But just saying, well, we can't get it perfect the first time, so therefore we shouldn't do it, is a kind of circular argument. You're never going to get any progress then. This is the kind of thing that people can now look at, which is why I really like the debate and things, because now we have something concrete that's out, published. It doesn't represent just one author's viewpoint, and maybe get some movement forward to help parts of the industry mature. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard work, but I use the word, it's a starting point for this.
I just want to say that I personally have not had the opinion of not doing a standard at all. what I really am concerned about with what has started is the terminology, and that's what the terminology has such a strong effect on managers. They hear that they're not testers, so they don't go through the type of everyday work that we as testers do, and it's a very important factor that the way the managers are influenced, and then how they influence their staff, and how they produce the work that they do. So it's for me personally, I find it scary because I've worked with some managers that are really poorly educated in how testers work. And because of that, they listen to things like, "Oh, I'm going to follow the standard, and we're right, we're doing the good thing," and it's a poor influence, especially, again, I'm going to say it, with medical devices. It is too new of an industry, and they think they're following it, and they're following their regulations, and they're deviating from what they need to produce for high quality. And if you notice, how many times do we hear about mobile devices or mobile software, how good it is or how bad it is? It's far too common. We don't give enough time to test and to learn more about how mobile devices, I should say mobile software, how mobile software behaves. So I'm not saying not to have a standard. What I am saying is be very cautious in how we term the words.
Can I jump in here on something and point to an example?
Yeah.
So if you look at the FAA's DO 178, well, it was 178B, it's now 178C standard, which specifies levels of white box coverage that have to be achieved on avionics software. I don't think that people in the avionics industry argue that that is the sum total of wisdom and the only thing that has to be done with respect to testing. But they do adhere to that as a standard for when they're doing their white box testing, how much coverage needs to be there, and it is an example of applying a risk-based approach to thinking about how thoroughly you need to test something, which is, of course, a good general strategy in any situation. So I think if you see that 29119 ends up being having the same kind of impact in safety critical world as DO 178C has, then signs are positive.
Yes, I'll agree to that.
And those things really form a minimum. And I understand your concern, Jean Ann. We've talked about having a tailoring guide or something, as well as, I'll call it, some education for the managers, because it's a real problem.
Yes, thank you.
So
All right,
why
so
don't we run the poll now? Sabrina, can you run the poll while we continue to talk?
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm going to disagree. So FAA rules are actual legal rules about the qualities that product has to have. I work in medical devices. There are legal laws that explain the obligation on the manufacturer about how they create a software product that's going to interact with the public. Laws are very different than these types of standards that we're talking about. That's a different kind of world. While I appreciate all the hard work that people have gone into creating the standard, I think they had in many cases good intentions. It's not necessary, and they think they're being helpful. I don't see the standard as actually being useful. And I once again just refer people over to ISST. There's a lot of people explaining why their particular view is that the standard's not useful or helpful in those cases.
And so
at this point, go ahead.
Well, Griffin, in ISO, I'll call it parlance, if the standard is not useful, here defined as nobody uses it and going forward into the future at some point nobody supports it, it in their way of doing, I'll call it business, it will go away and be retired. So there's
So-
it isn't a blank check going forward into the future.
Right, but there's other needs that a standard meets other than being a useful way to define testing. It also creates a marketplace. It also, quite frankly, it enables rent seeking by people, which is how the recent conversation got kicked off by James Christie's CAST presentation, where he talked about some of the parallels that he saw between classical rent seeking versus the ISO process around 29119.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's any rent seeking with other standards, though, Griffin. What other standards have rent seeking?
In terms of how does rent seeking occur in general, or are you talking about ISO specifically?
Well, for other ISO standards, why is there reason to believe that this ISO standard will generate rent seeking versus other ISO standards?
All right, so let's keep it. I'll confine my comment to 29119 then. Quite frankly, the concern about creating a certification and having organizations seeking ISO compliance at an organizational level around this standard appears like the people that created the standard are potentially economically advantaged in those cases, inappropriately.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, can I respond? Can I respond to that, because that rent seeking thing was actually sent directly at me during some online debate, so this is kind of touching a nerve for me. Again, you know, the implication that those of us who serve on volunteer groups like the ISTQB or this ISO working group are nefarious individuals who are in there to try to define some sort of standard so that we can extort money out of people that don't owe it to us is really insulting. And I mean, I can tell you that the amount of money that I have made based on ISTQB work compared to the amount of time that I put into it, I'd probably be better off standing in a grocery store asking paper or plastic. And it's just, I think that kind of immediately the ad hominem questioning of the motives of the people involved is just so unhelpful in this discussion. I don't see why it has to go there.
So you consider it an illegitimate question?
I consider it an ad hominem attack, and I think that Phil's question is very justified. That show evidence of that happening elsewhere. The implication that was thrown at me was, Rex has a private yacht and lives like Mitt Romney because of his involvement with ISTQB. Well, no, there's no evidence presented to that extent, and the same implications were made about some people in Jon's working group, that they were specifically doing this to further build a high-on-the-hog lifestyle without offering any proof whatsoever that they had ever done anything like that in the past in their previous standards work or ISTQB work.
I thought you and Mitt were friends, Rex.
I didn't vote for him, but I didn't vote for the other guy that you know of either. So.
So, Rex, it sounds like you would agree that if people are transparent about their economic interests and what their relationship with the standards organization are, that's completely appropriate, correct?
Well, I would say that I'm pretty sure that ISO, and Jon will have to address this, but I'm pretty sure that ISO has the same kind of conflict of interest standards that the ISTQB has, which is to say very strict. And we signed an agreement at the beginning of our work with the ISTQB to avoid any kinds of situations where there is going to be a conflict of interest, and that we are basically seeking rent or trying to strong arm competitors or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, and I assume it's the same with the ISO 29119. And Jon?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people are just fearing that the whole CMMI level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will be applied to ISO, and it's a totally different environment. That standard was developed for government organizations and procurement, and ISO is not for that. So it's just totally different.
Yeah, and the rent-seeking argument, as Rex pointed out, there is an unfortunate choice of words in there is what I would choose to say. I think it remains to be seen how this or any other ISO standard will affect the industry. Will there be companies and organizations that use them, I'll call it both to generate revenue and to, I'll say market themselves, and we've seen this with like the ISO 9000 series in some countries. It remains to be seen as to how big an issue that is. But Rex is right. The standard itself, if there's any, I'll call it proprietary kinds of things, it's supposed to be disclosed. I'm not aware of any in 29119. And also the standard itself, I realize, costs money, but that is the way ISO and IEEE both, as organizations, professional bodies, keep things going. It would be nice to have it be free, but that's not what those organizations do. So
okay, let's do one final poll while we finish up here, John. The poll is: does your company do business with other companies where a testing or software testing type trading language might be useful? So we'll do that poll for the next 30 seconds, and we'll keep talking. I think that you mentioned a good concept there, that maybe the wording of rent is possibly offensive, and probably the wrong wording to use for people. Actually, just saying that people are trying to make money off the standard, and that's just business. People try to do that, but I don't. Say again.
It's a technical term that has a definition.
Right, and that definition includes government coercion and attempts to stop competition, as opposed to offering a service that's related to something. I mean, it's amazing to infer that just because somebody offers a service that relates to something that they did volunteer work in, that is inherently evil or nefarious of them, and yet that's the underlying argument. There's a tweet just now that I'm responding to that makes exactly that point. It's just, like I said, it's not helpful to the debate. Obviously, people who are going to develop expertise with respect to things like ISTQB and ISO 29119 are going to be positioned to help other people better utilize those standards and techniques.
Yeah. And by the way, ISO itself as an organization is a little sensitive to this, I'll call it concern and argument. As I understand it, if ISO thought that rent seeking was in fact the primary motivator of participants in any standard, that would be a large conflict of interest, as Rex pointed out earlier, and I believe ISO would take great, I don't know the word, but they would not be happy with it. As an organization.
Closing remarks, Griffin and Jean Ann?
One of the things, first of all, thank you, John, for participating in the editing of the standard. I do really appreciate it. And I know you had offered in the past for assistance, and I would like to offer my assistance and have a voice and maybe help to redefine as we go further along, and be more specific with our terminology. That's one of the things I'm very concerned about, and I think that will resolve a lot of the problems that I see from my point of view as far as protesting this standard. It's one of the biggest concerns I have with how managers enforce it upon testers in an organization. And
okay, that's really interesting. So you really have a problem with the wording of it, and its
Well, I
application,
have more
correct?
than that.
Yeah.
Don't summarize,
Okay.
because that's not the only thing. But I see one of the biggest concerns from my point of view. I'm not speaking for everybody. For myself.
Right. And Griffin, what would you say would be your summary of what your viewpoint is?
Sure. Well, I appreciate everyone's hard work on creating this object. I really see it as unhelpful and essentially a curiosity. I could look and examine it, but it's not actually useful at a practical level, and I think it's fatally flawed at a fundamental level. So I would prefer not to, frankly, engage in a attempt to fix it. I think it needs to be rethought at a fundamental level and start over.
Okay. Rex, you have any closing remarks?
I guess I would just say that it's been really refreshing to participate in a debate like this. That's, there's strong disagreements and strong opinions, but a lot of mutual respect. And I wish that the Twitter sphere and other online discussions were halfway as civilized as this one has been.
Okay. And John?
Yeah, I echo Rex's, and I can offer anybody that has inputs and concerns, feel free to send them to me. I can't offer people to be actual voters and commenters unless you either join IEEE as an avenue or ISO, but I'm happy to field, as people do reviews, inputs directly to me. And in the future, I will try and honor those, even to the point of Griffin's. It needs to be rethought. I'd be happy to understand the exact, what parts need to be rethought, because as Rex said earlier, I've got issues with it too. As a standard, it's not perfect yet. Never will be.
Okay. Yeah, well, thanks a lot, guys, for participating, and I think we've had a really good, viewpoints from both sides, as well as some gray in the middle, and I think it's been really good to hear all of it in one place, in real words with real people instead of online, which, I think a lot of times people say things online that they wouldn't necessarily say face-to-face or in a real conversation, so I think it's important that we had this opportunity. I'll let Sabrina go ahead and close off. I think, Sabrina?
Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you to the panelists that joined us today for the very lively debate. To everybody out there, we will be answering your questions as we could barely get through them for this past hour. So we will be posting those up on our blog at XBOSoft.com, so please check that out. And we also are on Facebook and Google Plus and LinkedIn, all the usual social networks, where we will also be posting some of those questions with our answers as well. So please stay tuned on there. If you do have any other burning questions you want to ask us or about our software testing services, do email us, services@xbosoft.com. And we will be sending you the YouTube recording of this debate with the slides very shortly after this webinar, so you will have a recorded version. Thank you, everybody, and we'll let you know for the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Have a good weekend. Thanks.